Welcome to the Perrysburg Podcast, episode 39. I'm your host and Perrysburg resident, Kim Newlove. Today's episode is an interview with Katie Hunt Thomas. Katie is a disability rights attorney and the director of advocacy for the Ability Center of Greater Toledo. If you are new to this podcast, welcome. The Perrysburg Podcast is an informational podcast for prospective, new, and current Perrysburg, Ohio residents. We talk about what's in Perrysburg and why people like to live here. You can find the show notes for this episode on perrysburgpodcast.com. Back in episode 5 of the Perrysburg Podcast, I talked about census data. The census data for Perrysburg included a line item about people with disabilities. I am raising a child with a disability. He's 21, he's an adult, but still he'll always be my child. So that stat jumped out at me. 6.4% of Perrysburg residents under the age of 65 have a disability, and my son is among them. My source is census.gov/quickfacts. I accessed that data on August 23rd of 2023. Why so specific, Kim? That's the data that I used to create episode 5. That data, by the way, was compiled for the time period 2017 to 2021. I wanted to dig into that data further and learn more. And that is why Katie Hunt Thomas is with me today. She works for the Ability Center of Greater Toledo, which is a center for independent living in Northwest Ohio. We're going to discuss the types of disabilities that people in Perrysburg have, how you can get connected to the Ability Center if you or someone you care for has a disability and needs help, what makes Perrysburg disability friendly, areas for improvement, the importance of advocacy, and more. If you are interested in moving to Perrysburg or you already live here, I hope our conversation helps you. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Katie Hunt Thomas. Hi, Katie. Welcome to the Perrysburg Podcast.
Hi, Kim.
Good to have you with me today. As we get started, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, please?
My name's Katie Hunt Thomas. I am a disability rights attorney and director of advocacy at the Ability Center of Greater Toledo. The Ability Center is a center for independent living that serves 13 counties in Northwest Ohio. So for the Perrysburg podcast, we do serve Wood County and Perrysburg itself.
Very good. And do you have any personal connections to the ability community here in Perrysburg?
I myself was a Perrysburg resident for quite some time. My family moved to Perrysburg when I was going into sixth grade. I attended St. Rose for junior high, and then I lived in Perrysburg all throughout high school, and also lived there while I was in law school, so in my early 20s. I have a sister, an adult sister, who has Down syndrome. So I got to see, she was 6 when we moved to Perrysburg, and she actually grew up there. And I got to see her grow up within the Perrysburg community.
Very good. And for anybody who's wondering, where'd you go to high school?
Oh, well, I went to Toledo Central Catholic, but Perrysburg High School is a very good high school, and I had a lot of friends that went there.
That's all right. I know there's going to be at least one person wondering, where'd she go to high school? And that happens here in Perrysburg. Sometimes people go the Catholic school route. I respect that.
I would say my sister Maggie, who had Down syndrome and moved with us when she was 6, attended Perrysburg schools throughout her entire school career. So she, went to Toth Elementary, and then went to Perrysburg Junior High, Perrysburg High School. And then once she graduated from high school, she went to Pensa Vocational, which is at least within the community.
My son Craig has autism, and we've been connected to the Ability Center since we moved here from Toledo. They were part of our lives back then, and they're part of our lives now. So thank you for the important work that you do at the Ability Center.
Glad to hear it. I'm glad that you had a great experience here. I would say my work here is definitely driven by the fact that I have a sister who has Down syndrome. When I was going to law school, I knew I wanted to go to public interest law of some sort. And once I started out in public interest law, I somehow just kept getting drawn to disability cases. which led to my looking for a position at the Ability Center. And working here has really, in some ways, been a journey of self discovery and figuring out that the reason that disability issues are my priority is because I have a sister who has a disability. It wasn't something that was self evident initially, even though it sounds like it should be. And so this is both a personal and a professional mission for me. I love to hear that people have interacted with us and had a good experience.
Yes, ma'am. I think our favorite experience with the Ability Center has been the Ability Center Assistance Dogs program,
Mhm.
which was not originally at the Ability Center, but is now at the Ability Center. And my
Mhm.
son had a therapy dog. We had such a good experience. He is now deceased, the dog, not my son, but we had a great experience with Bond the Golden Retriever. He was awesome.
Great. We place dogs all over our 13 county service area. We place school counseling dogs in schools. We have a school counseling dog in the Perrysburg schools. We also place mobility assistance dogs throughout our entire 13 county service area and skilled companion dogs, which is probably the type of dog that your son had.
He had a therapy dog, actually, not a full-blown service dog. He had a therapy dog.
Mhm.
Yep. Yep, good experience for sure.
Great to hear that.
Katie, I did an episode a while back about census data, and I found that there's, I think, 6% of people in Perrysburg who have disabilities. So 6% of the people living in Perrysburg have some sort of a disability. But I was kind of curious about what kind of disabilities people in Perrysburg have. Some people have invisible disabilities. Not everybody that has a disability is in a wheelchair or uses a mobility device. So, can you tell me what kinds of disabilities do people in Perrysburg have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the disability population is a very diverse population. People can look in different, very many different ways, and still have a disability or qualify to have a disability. Here at the Ability Center, we are federally mandated to serve anybody with a disability. So, anybody with a physical, intellectual, mental health or sensory disability that walks through our doors, we are mandated to give them assistance. In preparation for this episode, I took a look at our records. So since probably around 2012, the Ability Center has served around 872 individuals that have the 43551 zip code who live in Perrysburg. Those folks are very diverse in terms of age, gender, and type of disability. So, just some examples of types of disabilities of folks that we've served. There are folks who have multiple disabilities who are maybe co diagnosed with more than one, folks who have cognitive or developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, musculoskeletal disabilities, some folks who have disabilities affecting their cardiac or circulatory system, some folks who have disabilities that affect their vision, so someone who's blind or low vision, some folks who identified themselves specifically as folks who have Down syndrome, dementia, stroke, autism spectrum disorder. So, really, the number of people we served in Perrysburg who have disabilities is quite high. And it's really a whole variety of different visibility disabilities, some that are going to be visible and readily apparent when a person looks at them, and some that are not, but where folks still need some sort of advice or assistance from us.
Thank you for clarifying that. When you look at a line item on census data, it doesn't say much, but it draws my attention because I have a family member with a disability. So on the census data, it just says with a disability under the age of 65 years, the percent from 2017 to 2021 is 6.4%. So I think you answered my question very well. And thank you for explaining the gender, age, and disability type. It sounds like we have a wide variety of individuals affected in Perrysburg with a disability. So it's not just one thing. It's not like we're a destination community for people who have had a stroke, for example.
Right. Right. No, I would say it probably mirrors the general population. Almost 1 in 4 people have a disability. Almost everyone is affected by disability, either themselves or someone that they love. I would also say for the census data, the sense among folks who are in this field is that it's also underreported because there are a lot of people that we would classify as having a disability. For example, maybe somebody who had a stroke who would not classify themselves and report it to a census that they have a disability. So that 6% is also likely actually underrepresenting the number of folks who would have a disability in your community.
Thank you for that additional information. I appreciate that. I didn't realize that disabilities could possibly be underreported. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, especially as an attorney who tries to tell people you have certain rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, sometimes I get a response, or more often than you would think, I get a response that, but I don't have a disability. But the person I'm speaking with definitely meets the definition of disability under the ADA. So, oh no, I don't have a disability. I just have bad knees, or I just have some problems with my hips, or something along those lines. Yeah, there are a lot of folks that wouldn't represent themselves as having a disability, but still fall under that classification and would certainly receive assistance from the Ability Center.
Good to know. How does one receive services from the Ability Center? I mean, how does somebody come into contact with you initially?
At the Ability Center, everybody who calls in gets a person. You can call our main line, 419-885-5733. It'll go to either our front desk or one of our navigators. The Ability Center has a program called the Navigator Program that provides advice and counsel and assistance and referrals to anybody who has a disability. So disability is a little bit of a specialty area. Sometimes folks have to be trained to know where to direct folks, and that's what our navigators do. So anybody can with a disability can call in and get advice and referral, or they can just walk in. We also have our navigator program has an open door. Folks are able to visit us between the hours of 9 and 5, 5 days a week, and they'll be able to sit and talk to a navigator. Just give us a call, or stop by and walk in. We'd be happy to speak with you.
Thank you. And I'm just curious if you could share a few of the resources that you offer or some of the reasons that people commonly come to you and what kind of help do they get?
So you already mentioned our assistance dogs program. I
I love the
I also
dogs. I'm like cheering over here. Yes, Ability Center Assistance Dogs Program. All right, sorry, go on.
when I give tours of the Ability Center, I always let people know that this is the only job I've had where I sometimes get to pet puppies. Um, we have an assistance dogs program. We train dogs that assist people who have mobility impairments. So service dogs. It's a really amazing program, and it's really amazing to see the dogs. Often they'll do things for folks who have mobility impairments, like pick things up off the ground, help folks transfer out of their wheelchair, fetch things from the refrigerator. That's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen them do. Assist them with everyday tasks. But we also have skilled companion or therapy dogs. We train school counseling dogs that go into the schools. They live with a counselor, generally a school counselor, and then we'll go to school with them. So children who need to see the school counselor can go in, and they can also pet the dog. And then we have an agility dogs program where we train folks with disabilities to run an agility course, which is kind of like picturing like a dog show. There's an agility course at a dog show, right? So we provide the dogs, and we assist folks with disabilities in learning how to run an agility course. It's a sport that folks can participate in and build confidence and skills. We have an home accessibility program where we also offer ramps to folks who have a home that might not be accessible. So if someone has a disability, but they're living in their home, they can't get in and out because they have no ramp. They can call us. We have a program that offers ramps to build ramps for folks. We also have an equipment program, a durable medical equipment program, where we accept used durable medical equipment. We sanitize it, and then we make it available to folks who need it in the community. It's a very active program. There's a large need for that program, and we have a lot of folks coming in and out of our center, either dropping off equipment or picking up equipment. We also have a community living program. Community living works with youth with disabilities. We have a specific program that works with youth and parents from birth to 12, and then a program that also works with youth from 12 onward. We teach independent living skills. We work with youth on transition into employment, and we help connect folks with resources. We host a lot of inclusive, family friendly events. And then we also are in the process of developing some adult inclusive recreation programs. The Ability Center offers a large and wide variety of different programs. All of those programs fit under the umbrella of independent living. So, of assisting people with disabilities to live as independently as possible. Each of those programs tries to meet a need that folks have that they have in order to live independently. Anybody who is interested in participating in one of our programs can call us or walk in, and someone, a navigator, will assist you in going through the application process, seeing what you might be eligible for in terms of our programming.
Very good. And as a podcaster, I have to ask you about the podcast. It's called 68 Words. What's your podcast about? The 68 Words podcast for the Ability Center.
Oh, yeah, thank you for asking. I mean, the other thing that we do as an independent living center is we try to change community perceptions of folks with disabilities. Our executive director, Stuart James, has launched a campaign called Think Differently Act. And the idea is we're challenging the community to think differently about disability and then take action, do something to act on that. One of the things that we're doing as part of that is our podcast. And 68 words is the number of words that went into the first non discrimination provision that protects individuals with disabilities. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was the very first law that was passed, civil rights law that protects folks with disabilities. The non-discrimination provision under Section 504 was only 68 words. When we were launching the podcast, those 68 words, Section 504, was the result of decades of disability advocacy and organizing and educating and policy advocacy, and it all kind of came to a head with just 68 words. But then that also changed the entire landscape of the way the United States treats disability. The 68 Words podcast features people with disabilities, or people who are doing something cool in the disability world, and is a disability focused podcast that's focused on this idea of independent living, which is the whole philosophy that our center revolves around.
And if I'm not mistaken, you have been a guest on that podcast, have you not?
Yes, I believe I have. It might have been it might have been a little while ago, but I'm sure at some point I was a guest on the podcast. I don't know that I was the most exciting guest that we've had, but yes, yes, I'm on that podcast.
I will put a link to the Ability Center's podcast. Again, it's called 68 Words. That'll be in the show notes on perrysburgpodcast.com. Very good. So this is not your first rodeo, ma'am.
No, I mean, honestly, this is part of my job is education on disability and disability issues. And so I have been on a number of different podcasts over the years.
Keep up the good work. I'm happy to have you with me today. And let's continue with the next question. I would like to know what makes Perrysburg disability friendly?
This answer is going to be partially, as somebody who works for the Ability Center, but also as a sister of somebody who has Down syndrome, and who you really spent a large part of her life growing up in Perrysburg. I would say, especially from a 365 degree view, Perrysburg is well known for having a very good public school system. I think you're familiar with that, Kim.
Yes, I am. I'm in it still in it with my son who's in the deferred graduation program. He's what you call a super senior. He's 21 and still in school, but he will be done when he is 22.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, we're having a good experience, I would say, especially this year. He really likes his teacher.
From that perspective, Perrysburg schools are, able to offer a very good, inclusive educational experience for a lot of kids with disabilities. And there really are a lot of resources there to support kids with disabilities. There's really a priority to keep folks in an inclusive classroom. Inclusion seems to be one of the goals of the system. To that extent, also, from a personal perspective, my sister also seemed to have some options. So once she got a little bit older and needed a little bit more of a specialized education, she also was able to not only go through Perrysburg High School, but then finish up her education at Penta. Those were very good experiences for her. Generally, Perrysburg is known as a school system to have a school system that's able to include and support kids with disabilities. Something else I wanted to mention, this is a more intellectual and developmental disability specific resource. The Wood County Board of Developmental Disabilities is also widely known as having a best practice, like best practices and services, and especially in inclusive services for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The Wood County Board of Developmental Disabilities serves Perrysburg. They really are often on the cutting edge in terms of housing, and Medicaid services, in terms of employment, and I know they work with a lot of employers in the city of Perrysburg to provide inclusive employment, for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They also provide a transportation system, because they know that that's a need. I think that Perrysburg has very strong services for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities with the Wood County Board of DD right there. And I'm not just saying that because my dad was on the board of the Wood County Board of DD, just, disclosing that. They really are well known for providing best practices, even in the state. And then this is from a personal perspective again, but for my sister, we had an incredibly welcoming neighborhood. The folks are our neighbors. They treated my sister just like they would any other person who lived next to them. They were incredibly welcoming and open with her and with my family. She had a very important piece and was part of our church in Perrysburg. They also watched out for her. So it was kind of a two-step thing where, when she would walk her therapy dog, Pearl, in the neighborhood, people would keep an eye out for her. But they also, were very welcoming, and treated her with dignity just like they would anybody else. Where we lived, it was a very welcoming community, and people were just very open to having a family member with a disability living right next to them.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing all the positive things. I always like to start with positive, but I know that on the flip side, there may be things that Perrysburg needs to work on yet. So, Katie, could you tell me, are there any parts about Perrysburg, any features of Perrysburg that make Perrysburg perhaps a little less disability friendly?
Every community has things that they can do to become more disability friendly. I didn't talk really about our advocacy program when I was talking about the Ability Center services. But what our advocacy program does is we try to change systems to make communities more inclusive for folks with disabilities. While we have really come a long way in the US since the ADA was passed in 1990, so 34 years ago, there is really a long way to go as well. And I would say not just nationally, but state of Ohio. Ohio has a lot of really great things that support the independence and growth of folks with disabilities. But we also still have a very long way to go. And so I would say that's true really in any community. In our advocacy program, we focus very specifically on four different issues that we've seen pop up as things that need to change in order to support folks with disabilities to live independently. And there are many more, but these are the four that we sort of focus on. So we focus on public transit. Public transit is necessary for many folks with disabilities who cannot drive due to a disability to be independent. So imagine what it would be like if you are unable to leave your home without taking a bus. That's the reality for a lot of folks with disabilities. So when we are trying to support and empower people with disabilities to be active in their community, to be employed, to have access to healthcare, access to housing, it's really important to have a strong public transit system. The second issue we focus on is public access. Often that's architectural access. So a lot of buildings here in Ohio and in Toledo are older and are not accessible to folks with disabilities. And this means that, a person who uses a wheelchair might not even be able to get in the door. So again, imagine if you were walking down the street and you couldn't even get into a business. That's one of the things the Americans with Disabilities Act was intended to remedy. And we still have a long way to go on that issue. That also involves things like providing American Sign Language interpreters and documents in alternate formats, having good signage. And there are lots of things that we need to do here to focus on that. We focus on housing. There is a serious lack of housing for folks with disabilities in Ohio, especially independent, inclusive housing, but that still might have supports and housing that's accessible that people can get into and get out of. And then our final issue that we focus on in advocacy is healthcare, access to healthcare. It sounds kind of counterintuitive that people with a disability would have trouble accessing healthcare, but it's the reality. So a lot of healthcare is not accessible. Healthcare providers don't have equipment that's accessible to treat folks with disabilities, or their facilities aren't accessible, or they're not accessible by public transit. And then a lot of the systems that we have that provide healthcare to people with disabilities are very challenging to get healthcare from and to get appropriate services out of. Those are the four issues we focus on really in advocacy. For the city of Perrysburg, the two that I would highlight there are probably public transit and then public access. I say public transit because while Perrysburg has Perrysburg Transit, it's very difficult to access. You have to reserve a spot weeks in advance. There's no what's called a subscription service where if you have a job, you can just reserve a spot every day to get to your job. Somebody has to call every day to get a ride, and they might not get that ride. So if somebody has a job, they might find that they don't have a way to get there one day. So it's very limited in terms of the capacity that it has to take people from place to place when they need to get there. I'm going to be honest, I know some folks in my network with disabilities who have moved to other places because of the lack of public transit, because they just weren't able to get to a job on a reliable basis. So, Perrysburg, if we're talking about ways to become more disability friendly, that's one way that would be very beneficial to city of Perrysburg. The other thing that I would highlight is public access. So a lot of buildings, especially in downtown Perrysburg or in other areas of Perrysburg, are also older. Were built pre-ADA, and there's no way for a lot of folks with disabilities to get inside. We get a lot of comments from people with disabilities that would like to especially utilize, for example, the downtown area of Perrysburg, but they really just can't get into a lot of businesses because of the way the architecture is designed. And I think there are a lot of older buildings and facilities that would need to be updated in order to be accessible. So I feel like I've been talking a long time. Kim, do you have questions on any of that?
I do actually. I want to make a comment. You did a really great job of talking about the positives and the negatives. And I want to say, as a podcast host, it's my job with the mission that I have on this podcast to talk about What the prospective Perrysburg residents might want to know, that's people looking to move here. What current Perrysburg residents might want to know, that's people, just been living here from 0 to infinity, they might have just moved here today, might have been here for 99 years. So, with my audience in mind, there are some people out there who move to Perrysburg because it's a destination community for education. That is actually what my family did. At the time that I thought about moving to Perrysburg, the year was 2006. I had I had a 3-year old and a 1-year old. And I knew that my son, who has autism, was not going to do well in Toledo public schools. I needed to find a better school system, a more inclusive school system for him. And then for our neurotypical or normal child, Derek, he was going to need a good opportunity as well. Because Perrysburg is kind of a destination community, there are people who haven't even had their kids yet who may end up needing the schools for special ed. I really appreciate you talking about how Perrysburg does a pretty good job for kids with disabilities, families who have children with disabilities. But as a parent of a child with a disability, I definitely want to say that I'm talking to other parents here. There is no cure for some of these disabilities. And I'm not saying you should accept less than what your child deserves, but just be a good advocate. And don't ever treat the school system like they have the answer and they're keeping it from you. Because I have met some very frustrated parents in my day. I'm not trying to shame them into behaving better, but I see what you see. There is no cure, and it is frustrating. I have a child with autism. I have been helping him for 18 years now, more than 18 years. Before we found out he had a disability, we were still trying to get him help and services. But I just want to say that as good as Perrysburg is for helping people with disabilities and including children in the school system, there still is no cure for some things. So set your expectations. There is no cure, but this is a great community, very inclusive. Like Katie was saying, her sister and her family were accepted. You're going to experience some good and then some frustrations as well, and that's normal. If you are feeling frustrated, you're normal. So I want to definitely talk about that. But then I also want to talk about transportation. Katie, you were talking a little bit about how Wood Lane helps with transportation. Some people who heard that piece and then heard you talk about on the flip side, there's some negative things about Perrysburg Transit. Can you kind of justify the comment that you made about Wood Lane being good about transportation, but then Perrysburg Transit not being available for everybody and schedulable for people who have recurring needs? Can you talk a little bit about how that can possibly be that one's good, but then one's not so good?
Definitely, I could definitely do that. And I would like to say, I'm an attorney, and I'm familiar with the rights of folks with disabilities, students with disabilities in the education system. I would highlight the education system as Perrysburg as a positive, but that does not mean that folks don't have to advocate for themselves or for their kids, or that they shouldn't be aware of their rights. No school district is immune from that. And parents are the ones who often know the needs of their kids, and have, have high expectations and high goals for their education. And often, they are in that position where they have to advocate no matter what school district they are in. So I just want to echo that as well, Kim, that I also understand that can be a very frustrating piece, for students with disabilities. You asked me a positive, and I think the Perrysburg school system is a positive, but it definitely does not mean that they are immune from needing to be pushed and needing advocacy as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. That you got to set your expectations, be a good advocate, and then don't expect a cure too. Because I think sometimes special needs parents need to hear that from special needs parents. It's a hard lesson. It's a hard one lesson in my book because I have learned that no matter how hard I have tried, my son is only going to achieve his full potential. And sometimes that is not what somebody else's full potential looks like. I'm sorry I went on a negative tangent there, didn't I, Katie? But anyways, back to my transportation question. Wood Lane has some transportation. Why can't that make up for Perrysburg Transit maybe not being all that it needs to be?
Mhm. Great question. So, yeah, hang in there. Every parent feels that. I completely understand where you're coming from and support that. Transportation. I would say number one, so the County Board of Developmental Disabilities only serves people who have intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. So those are not the only folks that need transportation. Anybody who has a disability that prevents them from driving, which could be, a physical disability, like maybe somebody is paralyzed and so they're unable to drive. It could be something like epilepsy. I know folks who rely on public transit because they have epilepsy, so they cannot drive. It could be people over the age of 55. Our vision starts to go, or there's a point where everybody loses their license. Um, the Wood County Board of DD would not provide transportation to any of those folks. I mean, so I think that's number one. And so, like we talked about, there's really a variety of people with disabilities who live in Perrysburg and a whole variety of disabilities. Again, 1 in 4 people have a disability, even if you can't see it. So there's a whole bunch of folks not served, not within the service eligibility of the county boards of DD. The second thing is that they have started to provide transportation because that was a need. It's to their activities. So, folks with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities, they have a lot of activities that aren't within the scope of the board of DD as well. We talked about my sister. She lived in our neighborhood. She worked at the Caranor Country Club, which was an excellent employer for her, by the way. She helped, set things up for lunches and dinners. She loved helping get everything set up for weddings. So she would set the tables, she would help do dishes. She worked there for over a decade. And so she needed transportation to get there. That's not a Wood County Board of DD activity. It's just the place she worked. She often would take the bus to go maybe get a manicure or pedicure. She enjoyed doing that. That's not something that Wood County Board of DD is going to provide transportation to. While she might have transportation to things that she participated in as part of that service, that wasn't her life. That's the services provided by the Wood County Board. That wasn't her entire life. And she needed transportation elsewhere as well. And it would be the same really for a lot of folks who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. The services provided by the county boards are really a great benefit to them, but it's not necessarily their entire life. They need to be able to get from point A to point B because the community provides a public transit system. The one person that I mentioned, or one of the people I mentioned who moved out of Perrysburg because they could not get to their job via Perrysburg Transit on a reliable basis, actually worked in Toledo. A lot of people live in Perrysburg and work in Toledo. It was just so difficult when this person couldn't drive to get transportation from Perrysburg to their job in Toledo that they did move. I want to, applaud the Wood County Board of DD for making that service available because it is something that they saw as a need. And it was definitely beneficial because before they had it, my parents transported my sister to Special Olympics in Bowling Green for, over a decade by themselves, to their swim practices and swim meets and etc. Because there was no transportation to get down there. So I want to applaud them for putting that in place, but it definitely doesn't serve all the needs that everybody with a disability in Perrysburg is going to have.
Katie, this is all great information, and I think this would really help somebody who's looking to move to Perrysburg who might have a disability decide whether they want to move here or not, or people who are currently living here and give birth to a person with a disability or develop a disability. It might help them to understand some of the positives and the negatives about Perrysburg when it comes to having a disability. I know no place is perfect, but you did a great job talking about transportation, access to buildings, housing, healthcare, and then, communities being good and classrooms being good. the Wood County Department of Developmental Disabilities, neighbors, community. I think we already said that. And there are some positives about transportation. So I think you did a really good job creating a fair and balanced picture of disability life in Perrysburg. Is there anything you'd like to add?
What I would say, is that this kind of podcast is really important, and I appreciate that, you have something very focused on your own community that's talking about disability and disability issues. A lot of times there aren't media outlets or ways for people with disabilities to elevate their voices and talk about what it is that they need, or for their families to talk about, what it is that they need. And I just appreciate that you put this podcast together, and are giving us an opportunity to talk about, some of the pluses and minuses of your own community when it comes to being disability friendly.
It's been my pleasure having you on the podcast today. And I'd like to invite you or someone else from the Ability Center to come back and talk about Wood County Plays and the disability friendly playground at Rotary Park here in Perrysburg, or the DREAM program, which I understand has to do with picture books and lesson plans in the school. Maybe we could do that in the fall, and definitely have something to do with the assistance dogs at some point too, because I just get happy thinking about dogs. That would be a great topic for the future. So, anyways, you can look forward to being back on the podcast or someone from the Ability Center, because people with disabilities are part of Perrysburg. They're not just in the census data, they're around us. And like you said in the beginning, their presence may be underreported. So it's good to talk about the things that don't get enough attention, because once everybody's aware, we can be a more inclusive community.
Yes, and thank you for reaching out to us and asking about some of the things that are already positive, and then also improvements that you can make. Our advocacy program always is willing to work with municipalities to help them do things like Americans with Disabilities Act transition plans and reviews, and work on other projects to ensure that they're as disability friendly as possible. So just putting us out there as well as a resource. And I look forward to either working with you on or facilitating further discussions about the ways we're present in your community, and things that are positive from a disability note as well in Perrysburg.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you so much for being here today, Katie. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you again to Katie Hunt Thomas for being my guest today on the Perrysburg Podcast, episode 39. We covered a lot in our interview. We talked for more than 40 minutes, and some of the most interesting points for me were that disabilities are underreported. That was interesting. And that the Ability Center assigns a navigator to each person in need. Navigating the world of autism was a very confusing experience for me at first, my husband and me, both of us. Learning felt like drinking from a fire hose. If you find yourself in the disability world and you feel overwhelmed, let other people help you. Call the Ability Center. They can help. Thank you for listening to episode 39 of the Perrysburg Podcast. Please visit perrysburgpodcast.com to read the show notes. In the show notes, I'll have links to the Ability Center of Greater Toledo, 68 Words Podcast, Katie Hunt Thomas's LinkedIn profile, the link to sign up for the weekly newsletter for this podcast, and more. If you know someone who could use help from the Ability Center, please share this episode with them. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to or follow the Perrysburg Podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. Thanks for listening today. I'll talk to you next week.